Hi everyone. This video will probably be provocative to some people, but I honestly believe these are things that has to be said. Um, when I made the video about Jeremy Kyle last week, I thought I might get some attention. It's got 1,200 views in the last week, so it's been, by my standards, that's quite a lot. So it's obviously got attention. It's obviously a subject that people have strong views on, either feeling as I do that Jeremy Kyle is a POS or is strongly supportive of him. I don't think many people are neutral on Jeremy Kyle. Maybe some people, lucky for them, who really don't know much about him. If you don't know, Jeremy Kyle is a British television presenter who's very controversial because of the very aggressive um, approach he takes to guests that appeared on the show. The whole format of the show was extremely confrontational. Like other talk shows, he would raise issues like drug dependency, criminal behavior, relationship problems, but he would do it in such a way that was, very confrontational, very different from the more conversational approach of someone like Ricky Lake or, to use a British example, Trisha Goddard, I guess. Um, and that's what Kyle became famous for. He was sort of like Jerry Springer, but the the difference is with Kyle's storylines, they were real. A lot of Springer's storylines were, I think, embellished. I mean, I also have a very low opinion of Jerry Springer, but and I think Springer started a lot of this poison, but or at least he popularized it. Kyle's worse, I think, because with Kyle, there is definitely a more serious aspect to it. With Jeremy Kyle, it isn't so much really, really sensational sort of plot lines like, I don't know, my transgender half brother is really my nephew or something like that. With Jeremy Kyle, it was more straightforward storylines, like, my ex boyfriend beats me up or something like that. My son is a benefit cheat, this sort of thing that's more kind of conventional, but he would really bring out the guests and just lay into them verbally, and then encourage his vile studio audience to do likewise. And Kyle was a crafty operator. I remember there was one episode where there was a girl who was abusing her boyfriend physically, and it's one of the very few times Kyle had a spot of semi decency. He said, if this was the other way around, you lot would be um, like, because they were laughing at this guy. He was a victim of domestic violence, and they were laughing at him, which is everything you need to know about how low in values a lot of Jeremy Kyle supporters are. But Kyle can tell, if this was the other way around, you wouldn't be laughing. Well, that's all very well, Jeremy, but you're the one that's riling them up in the first place. So Jeremy Kyle's just Jerry Springer. Jeremy Kyle is a puppet master. He's I don't think he's stupid, that's the thing. I think he's quite smart, smart enough to be as manipulative as he has been. But he has no actual qualifications to do what he's done. He's not a criminologist, he's not a barrister, he's not a police officer. He has had no background experience to handle the sort of things that he is doing. There was one show where a man actually headbutted his love rival. The other guy come out, and there was a physical assault on, as it was filmed. And he was arrested for assault. And the judge in Manchester actually said he famously called it human bear baiting. And he said if he had his way, the hosts and presenters would be in the dock as well. I don't often agree with judges, but I agree with that. I think Jeremy Kyle is disgusting, absolutely disgusting. I mean, he's been whining about the fact the last few years have been hard for him. And then he puts his thing, oh, but we have to remember a man died. And absolute crocodile tears. I think that's an insult to the family of Steve Diamond. Now, what I want to do in this video is confront the mentality of Kyle supporters. And I don't, imagine this will get any of them to see the light. That's not really the purpose. The purpose is to challenge them and to call them out, because I think, I can talk all day about how much I abhor Jeremy Kyle himself. But in the end of the day, if he didn't have a support base, he wouldn't have had a show. ITV wouldn't have cynically said, oh, well, he's good for ratings. So I do hold them partially responsible as well for the very ugly nature of that show. Certainly, Kyle as the circus master was part of it, a big part of it, central part of it. But he couldn't have done that without the studio audience. Um, I wonder what format it would have taken actually if it had continued 1 year later. If it had gone on into the pandemic, they wouldn't have been able to have the studio audience. So that might have been interesting. What sort of format would they have taken? I hadn't actually thought about that until literally just now. On my video, had some people like I'm going to name check a few people here. Universal Thinker 3807, AB Multimedia Designer, Night Forest 666. You guys were leaving, good comments, intelligent comments, and there were other support comments as well. I had others. I think there was Pasago 16, or apologies if I'm quoting your username wrong. But you raised the question about, well, what about Love Island? This is something that comes up a lot. People say, well, the Cow Show was taken off air, but there's been even more suicides on Celebrity Love Island. My response to that is, well, twofold. I honestly don't know it as well. I'm just more familiar with the Kyle show because I've been following it from a critical perspective for several years. Um, but certainly, I don't get a good impression from Love Island. I would definitely have it taken off air. Um, I think when it comes to entertainment, there's a very, very fine line between being, avant-garde and new and fresh, and sometimes that means a bit risque, and I'm okay with that. I would mention the Traitors, for example. It certainly wouldn't be everyone's cup of tea, but the point I would make about that is it's a game show that has an element of suspense, and there's tensions there because the contestants are working out to find out who's a traitor, and sometimes it gets into personal animosity. I would still say that is a world apart from something like Jimmy Kyle because with the traitors is entirely within the confines of the show. And sometimes, people get quite personal. People can be snarky. There is a cynical element to it, but with the Jeremy Kyle show, we would talk about people's private lives. That's a fundamental difference. Um, and with traitors, at least everyone has a roughly equal chance. They have their say at the round table, and they can say their piece. They can defend themselves. If you were a guest on the Jeremy Kyle show, you barely got a word in sideways because Kyle would talk over you. So um, I would really, really, really urge people, if this show does come about again, and I'm not quite sure what's happening. It may be that Kyle is actually taking over from Kate Garraway. I don't know if it actually means the show is coming back in the format that it was in. I don't think we'll even see Jeremy Kyle show in the same sense. But the very fact that this man has been given a platform is bad enough. I don't think he deserves it. He was on Talk TV for a while, but the fact that Kyle said things have been hard for me recently. What a sanctimonious creep, really. I mean, Kyle's may become a rich man out of exploiting people's misery. This is the reality. So what he has to complain about, I don't know. Um, the fact that some of the tabloids called him out, the fact that he got a little bit of his own medicine for once, I don't know. But you look at the mentality of Kyle fans. I honestly struggle to see any of them produce an intelligent argument. I'll make one caveat. Um, if someone is a survivor of domestic violence or they have personally been directly affected by one of the issues that featured on the show, there may be some ground that they would be interested in watching that. Okay, I'll be open-minded enough to say that. I don't think that everyone in those studio audiences were just, others who'd been through a similar problem. I think the issue was they were just ghouls that came in with a morbid sort of interest, I must admit, I have a low opinion of people who forcefully defend the show because they find it entertaining. What sort of person finds the emotional turmoil of others to be entertaining in that sense? We're not talking about a game show where they need to work out puzzles or determine who's a traitor in the confines of a game show. We're talking about people being judged on their private lives, and I've always said, some of those guests were pretty unlikable characters. They were criminals, and I'm no hypocrite in that sense. I'm conservative on crime. So I'm not coming at this from the view of a so-called bleeding heart liberal. I think some of those people, certainly domestic abusers, belong in jail. In fact, I'm more hardline than Kyle was because he's parading them on national TV. I would say no, they should be behind bars. So if you're defending Kyle because you think he lectures these people, he's given them money to appear on the show anyway. The man's a charlatan. Um, but there's a few other, yeah, that Love Island thing is one that's often brought up. Just because Love Island may be garbage, it's not like, you know, what's that expression? I was going to say two wrongs don't make a right. Now that would be that's a misplaced expression, but yeah, I mean, just because Celebrity Love Island is rubbish doesn't mean that that underplays how bad the Kyle show was. And you might say, oh, it's only one suicide. That's not the point. For years, Kyle was playing emotional games with people. How do we know? I mean, how do we know there aren't people out there who've been on the show who have contemplated suicide as a result but didn't go through with it? How do we know that people haven't you know, been through emotional hell because of what? In fact, during the parliamentary committee into this, and I knew about that because my local MP at the time, Julie Elliott, was on it. Guests were talking about how they did feel misled, how there were support services available, but not sufficiently. Um, and even that I find quite ironic. We're the ones that are going to vilify you on national TV, tell you that you're a terrible person, but if it makes you feel bad, we've got a support service. That's just ludicrous. That's a bit like a thief coming into someone's house and then saying to the housekeeper, oh, by the way, here's a lock. So for ITV to turn around and say, oh, support was available, they're the ones that caused the problem in the first place. It's just ironic. I mean, in the case of Steve Diamond, I know um, that apparently ITV have claimed, oh well, we've provided helpline numbers. He was in total distress. He didn't know what to do, according to the Sun. And I know that the coroner found no causal direct link between his death and appearing on the Kyle show, but I think common sense would suggest otherwise. Also, maybe a coroner is being cautious because they want to avoid getting into a politicized argument or maybe getting into legal basis. A coroner cannot make a legal statement, for instance. But if you have someone who has had a history of depression and they appear on a show like that and they're vilified, in the case of Steve Diamond, he'd failed a lie detector test. Well, there's a reason lie detector tests aren't used in a court of law because they're not foolproof. So even if the chances are he probably was lying, it doesn't mean he definitely was. And it's just a sick, sick experiment in human emotions. I just find it repulsive. But the excuses that people make, oh, well, no one forced them to go on. They went on of their own accord. Well, on the surface, this is true. But that argument starts to run a bit flat when you consider it a bit more. If someone is misled, is it really a reasonable argument to say, well, they chose to go on of their own accord? Take the McKamey Manor, for instance. If you're familiar with that, it was a controversial haunted attraction in the United States. It's moved around a few times. But the controversy was that the manager of that, the organizer, Russ McKamey, he urged them not to go on. He'd say it's terrible, you don't want to do this, and he'd get them to sign a waiver. But the thing is that waiver and that legal document, we don't know how much it covered, and we don't even know how legally applicable it was. It's been said, for instance, that there was no safe word, that there was real mental trauma going on in that place, and it doesn't matter if they signed something, because if they only saw, for example, a certain portion of what other contestants went through, um, we just don't know what's going on behind closed doors, and I think it's the same with a show like Jeremy Kyle. Kyle and the producers can claim that they told the guests what it was all about. They give them support numbers and all the rest of it. And the other thing is, but that doesn't account for misleading someone. And we know this happened because a man in one episode was told that he was going to reconcile with his partner. He saw her new lover come out, and in a rage, he headbutted the other guy. Now, that had happened because Kyle misled him. I'm not justifying it, it's assault, but Kyle had misled that man. He humiliated him on national TV. Or, you made him basically feel like a cuckold on national TV. The judge in that case called it human derailing, and said if I had my way, the producers and hosts would be in the dock as well. Um, Kyle is a complete vulture. You know, he played judge, jury, and executioner, but he ran away when the attention was turned on himself. And this is another reason I really have a low opinion of Kyle fans, because they seem to think Jeremy Kyle is perfect. This is a very sheepish way of thinking, to idolize someone to that extent that you think they're above reproach, that you think they somehow have the qualifications to play judge, jury, and executioner. You know, my channel, like any creator, I want this channel to grow. And of course, it's always nice to get support. I always value, positive feedback. But I'm never going to just want an echo chamber and just expect people to agree with me. Problem with Kyle fans is they don't think objectively. I don't think they're particularly intelligent. And I'm not saying that from a snobby point of view. I genuinely don't think they're very intelligent because I don't see intelligent arguments. I don't see a Kyle fan coming up with a very objective, intelligent um, way of thinking. All they seem to come up with is, oh, well, no one forced him to go on. What about other shows? Or we love Jeremy, bring him back. Jeremy's just telling it like it is. Except he wasn't always just telling it like he is. He misled people. He distorted things. Um, and it wasn't just a show, he would put in this narrative into society. So, for instance, he would get a benefit fraudster who was, a pretty prolific fraudster, and then try to imply that all claimants were like that. So Kyle is a hate monger, actually. Um, I think he's a demagogue. I think he's a disgusting, low life creep. I mean, I'm just going to be ranting if I just, there's not enough adjectives I can think of to describe the man. I cannot stand him. Um, but people might say, Nathan, why do you get so animated about this? It doesn't affect you personally. I don't personally know anyone who's been on the show. I would certainly never go on it. I may choose to go on. I would say that at this point, if you go on the show, just if it comes back, that is, don't be surprised if Kyle, you know, please, please, please don't do it. Please consider another approach. Go to the Samaritans. Go to marriage guidance counselor. Get professional help. Do not go to Jeremy Kyle. He's not a professional. What he will do, he might give you some money, but he is going to exploit your problem. And the supporters might say he's got drug addicts into rehabilitation. He's reconciled feuding partners, and he may have done some of that. I don't think you could, survive in a show that long without doing some good. But my question is, does the good that he's done balance out the very cynical bad stuff that he's done? I'm not sure that it does, because he could do that good stuff without the nasty element. He could do all of that. This is the thing. If he has got that record, then why not do that without this nasty, cynical edge of, laying into people, publicly humiliating them? It just, it's contemptible. It really is. And again, this is not about, I'm sympathetic to the guests necessarily. Some of them are no doubt obnoxious, but don't parade them on national TV. Make them face legal consequences for their actions, if it's applicable. I'm going to wrap this up, but like I say, unless you really, really have a direct link to the storyline involved, like you're a domestic violence survivor or something like that, if you watch the Jeremy Kyle show, if you go in that studio audience, because you get a cheap kick of the emotional turmoil of others' problems, what does that say about you? And the fact that it's popular, I'll tell you something. In this country, up until 1868, we have public hangings, right? They were a form of popular entertainment. People would go on a family day out to see the condemned publicly executed. It was sick. It was really Charles Dickens and William Makepeace Thackeray both attended public hangings and spoke of their absolute how it deeply affected them. That was. But I have absolutely no doubt that the people who watch Jeremy Kyle and go into the studio audience 200 years ago, they'd be at Tyburn or Newgate as it then was, um, jeering at the condemned and getting a kick out of watching someone die. I really do believe it's the same mentality. Um, or going even further back, they'd be the people who would relish gladiatorial combat. But we know In at the time of public hangings, at the time of gladiatorial combat, there were voices of conscience as well that said, actually, is this right? So I think if the show does come back in its old format, that would be very sad, and it would just show ITV haven't learned a damn thing. I don't think Kyle deserved any platform, but at least it probably won't be the show in its old format. But I just want to put it out there: if you are a Kyle fan, you're obviously not going to like what I'm saying. You can insult me, whatever. I have a very low opinion of someone who finds some sort of entertainment in another's emotion or turmoil, because we're all, none of us are perfect. We can all have times in our life where we're going through a challenging situation. We all make bad choices at some point. So what right do you have to sit in that studio audience and leer at people and judge them? And in that context, if they've done something wrong, if they've committed criminal offences, they should be held criminally responsible. But turning it into a form of entertainment, I think, it's disgusting. It's one of the worst things that ever air on British TV, and that doesn't exonerate Love Island. I'd like to see the back of Love Island as well. I'd like to see the back of any show that doesn't take into consideration ethical treatment of participants. Um, and it isn't just this country. I'll just quickly run off on this. There was a very sick show in Japan in the 1990s where a man was basically brought into a room and he was essentially prisoner for years. This was horrendous. The poor guy was obviously mentally affected by this. Um, they gave him food and they gave him all these tasks, but he lost clothes if he lost a task. It's like some sort of dystopian nightmare. And it was a form of entertainment. Um, in Japan, a country that has a very high suicide rate, so that's this isn't unique to the UK, but certainly Britain and America, we have these sort of TV talk shows that are in America. The Steve Wilkos show is probably the closest equivalent to Jeremy Kyle. Indeed, there was Jeremy Kyle US. Um, what a vulture! What a horrible little man. He can give abuse, but he can't take it. But final thing I'm going to say to the Kyle fans: your arguments are weak. You don't come across as intelligent. Everything you say is flawed. Um, Come up with a decent argument and stop acting like Kyle is perfect, because he isn't.